around the show. So if we walk through just talking about, let's say, the main points of the show, looking at some of the photographs, postcards, artworks, and then I don't think all of us can focus on everything and then move together. So I would be talking about it, and then we sort of afterwards you all can take a look, and then if you all have questions, you get back to me. That sort of thing. Okay. So can I ask, are you all undergrad students?
Yes, ma'am.
No, ma'am. Third year?
First
Second
year.
First year freshers.
Okay.
They are fresh out of school.
I see. Okay, so which means a little bit of context building is required for you all to understand the show. And this is a paper that you all are
Yes.
studying, which is Delhi Through the Ages.
Yes, madam.
Correct? Okay. So generally, let's start from how this show was conceptualized. So we do have an active archive where we had a lot of material on Delhi. So now we invited the two curators, Rana Safvi and Swapna Little, if you all are aware of who they are historians of Delhi. Now they came in and then they saw that there is an abundant material related to the Delhi Darbars. So now whenever scholars or historians have studied or researched the Darbars, they've been historians of the Raj. So this time we thought it'd be interesting to have two historians of Delhi looking at events that happened during the colonial period, but putting that into the context of the history of Delhi. And that's where this whole sort of exhibition begins. Now, you know that in 1602, the East India Company takes power over Delhi, and then the Mughal Empire and the Mughal Emperor becomes a puppet ruler. You see 1857 happening, and right after that, in 1858, you have a proclamation where, under the Act, India comes under the British Crown. Right. So now, let's say 2 decades later, the first Delhi Darbar happens, which is called the Imperial Assemblage, 1877. That declares Queen Victoria the Empress of India. Okay, Sireke. Then you have the second Delhi Darbar, that happens in 1903, which declares King Edward VII, the Emperor of India, and the third Darbar, which has King George V and Queen Mary attending in person, and that's the coronation of King George V as the Emperor. So that's basically the context, and then we move on bit by bit. Right? So this exhibition is divided into 5 sections. So the first section is actually called Dehli Darshan. Now, you have the British capital being Calcutta. So the basic question that comes up is that if the British is deciding on having these darbars in Delhi, why Delhi? And why not their capital in Calcutta? Right? So one of the major parts of it is the imperial past of Delhi. Right? Delhi has been the seat for so many dynasties, the Sultanate Empire, the Mughal Empire. And secondly, also Delhi being right in the heart of the subcontinent. It's much better connected to the far-flung regions of India where people can come to attend the darbars. So that's why Delhi is chosen. Now this whole section consists of photographs, artworks, postcards of Delhi, which talks about the history of Delhi. And the history of Delhi has multiple histories. So it's 7 cities. And now each of these photographs and works of art move from one city to another. And we start with Lal Kot, which is Qutbuddin Aiba. And you see how not just the architecture, the culture, the built heritage of Delhi becomes important during the darbars because they get appropriated, but they themselves are so rich in history where the history is being rewritten and renegotiated period after period, right? So you have again, images of the first city, which is Lal Kot, and you have the Qutub complex. Now, if you look at this company painting, it is a very rare company painting because it has the cupola on top of the Qutub Minar. And the cupola on top of the Qutub Minar was there only for, let's say, 2 decades. It was put in by Major Robert Smith in 1829. And then it was pretty much a wooden ball that was kept on top of the Minar. And let's say about a decade later, it got struck by lightning. So then in 1848, they took the decision of removing the cupola. So you see how with the coming in of the British, these existing monuments, important sites, also started getting renegotiated and started changing. And we see that through the story of the Darbars as well when we move along with it. So this is just one example. So each of these stories, if you see, you will go through it later, where Rana and Swapna have all written about the different monuments, the history of these monuments, relating it to the history of the different cities. Now, if you see, one thing I would like to bring your attention to is the tomb of Nizamuddin. If you see the architecture and the architectural style in the tomb of Nizamuddin, I'll tell you why it's important, because once you go back to see the structures of the darbars, you'll see how the architectural styles and the traditions were appropriated by the British. So you understand how the visual landscape of Delhi, the existing landscape of Delhi, is taken and then used by the British during the coronation darbars. And we'll delve into it later. So photographs of the Purana Qila, Safdarjung's tomb. Now this is interesting, how there's one monument which is Firoz Shah's pillar. So like I was talking about how, the history gets written multiple times and each monument gets associated with a different period of history differently. So the Firoz Shah's pillar had the Ashokan edicts on it. Now there is a person called Valencia Steer who wrote a book during the Delhi Darbar of 1903, and he writes that Ashoka was the first Kaisar-e-Hind, so the first emperor of India. And he says it's befitting that years later you have the Darbar, which sort of coronates Edward VII as the latest Kaisar-e-Hind. So how they're associating, like imperial, the imperial tradition to empires of the past, and then talking about themselves as natural successors and natural rulers of India. Then you have two very old photos. It's called Samuel Bourne. Now you'll hear the name Bourne and Shepherd very often. They're a commercial studio, and they were some of the most famous studios in India in the 19th century. So Bourne during this time is going around taking photographs of Calcutta, of Delhi. So this is one photograph of Chandni Chowk, and you see how different Chandni Chowk looks. You can barely tell that it is what it looks like right now, the amount that it has changed. And you see this is Elgin Road in Chandni Chowk, and you have what they call the Ghanta Ghar, which is the clock tower, and it no longer exists anymore. So just looking at how once upon a time, if you have sites and monuments associated to the time, with the ravages of time you may not see it. So you all can come back and take a look at this section a little. Well, that wall right behind you, Red Fort, and those are images of the Jama Masjid. Now we'll discuss how the Red Fort and the Jama Masjid become supremely important during the British period, and how the space gets renegotiated during the Darbars. If you move on to the chime in, you all can ask questions. Okay. So if you all have questions, you all can stop me, you all can discuss, and we can see the exhibition together, rather than me rattling off and you all coming back at the end of it, right? So the second section is 1857. Now it was extremely important for us to include 1857 while we're talking about the three darbars. Why? Because 1857, the revolt completely devastated Delhi. And after the suppression of Delhi, you have all of the important sites, monuments shut. You have all the intelligentsia of Delhi sort of, moved out. You have Bahadur Shah Zafar kind of being exiled. So Delhi was in complete ravages by the end of 1857, 1858. Now, and this is also the time right after where, the British government takes the decision that India will now come under the British Crown, which means they understand that the company has made a grave mistake. Now this is the time to make reparations for that mistake, so that people are still consolidated under the crown and the British is still ruling over India. So which means damage control is required. And you see, if 1857 has happened, nearly just 2 decades later, the British is organizing one of the largest and the most celebratory events that the Raj has ever held in India. And it's happening in Delhi. So you understand that maybe the first Durbar is also that gesture of reconciliation and healing with Delhi and its people, right? Because the Darbars as an event is not just bringing attention to the British Raj in India, but it's also bringing attention to Delhi as a city, right? If you look at G20, just when G20 happened, you see the entire landscape of Delhi is changing because you have an event happening in the city. The same way, you have the entirety of the landscape changing in Delhi. By 1864 is when Jama Masjid is returned to the people back for prayers. It was then sort of closed off after the revolt, and the similar sort of boons are given during the Darbars, where places of worship are given back to people, places of Delhi are reclaimed by its citizens. So now this section is filled with prints, photographs, and postcards, which are essentially by British artists or British photographers. And we've done that very deliberately because they are writing a narrative of Delhi. So they are also writing a history of Delhi with the revolt. And it's important to understand how they are writing this history, right? So if you look at two prints, this one's by Orlando Nuri and this one's by a British Army officer called George Atkinson. Now they are sketching and making these prints. They've both served in the army during the revolt, and after which they're making these sort of prints. George Atkinson's book, which is called Campaign of India, is in the vitrine behind you. Right, so if you can look at it later. They're making these sketches which depict the revolt and then writing an account of what took place. So they're talking about how the sepoys sort of massacred, Delhi, and how, the British Army were brave soldiers that took back Delhi. So this is the kind of narrative and the kind of history that's being written. And it's incredibly important to understand that if this is the history that's written, 20 years later, another history is being written by the British with the Darbars in Delhi. This wall is actually 3 photographs. They're very rare photographs taken by a photographer called Felix Beato. Beato is actually one of the most famous war photographers in the 19th century, and he comes to India specifically to document the aftermath of the revolt. Right? And he is a commercial photographer at the end of the day. But by the time he actually makes the time to come to India, the revolt is over. He's coming in 1858. So he takes photographs in a manner that stages the immediacy of the events. So he cannot actually document the revolt, but he's documenting the aftermath of the revolt because he knows that an audience back in Britain would like to see what happened. So this is a photograph of something called the Crow's Nest Battery. So the British put up gun batteries in different places in Delhi before September 1857 when they retook Delhi. And this is one of those pictures where you have the battery with the guns and ammunitions. Then you move on to Sabzi Mandi. Sabzi Mandi was a place where the sepoys sort of gathered before they launched attacks in Delhi. And the third one is quite interesting. It's the Nakal Khana in Red Fort, where he's written an inscription that says, "Tree in the palace under which 119 Europeans were murdered in June 1857. Now, historians have written of the same incident, but the incident took place in May 1857. And only 56 Europeans were killed. And they were mostly women and children. So you understand that inscriptions on these photographs are sometimes not just written with the colonial gaze, but are also written in a manner that shows the social relationships and the histories that they're writing. He's basically taking these photographs for the British audience. So he knows that these need to sell, right? So he's writing a narrative accordingly, knowing that, okay, what's going to, get a better reach back in the British metropole. Behind you are sort of prints from a book called History of Indian Mutiny, in the book, but the book again. And if you see, all of the prints describe the suppression of Delhi in September 1857. They're called Repulse of a Sortie and something else. I think retaking of a sortie, but all of it is pretty much British Army officers trying to suppress the sepoys. So you see, these are the images that kind of get into mainstream, and this is how the revolt is then remembered. One of the interesting things that we thought we would add to this whole section is a QR code that you all can, look at later. The QR code actually opens to poems of Bahadur Shah Zafar written during this time. And you'll understand the contrast between the poems that he's writing and the images that you're seeing of the revolt here. And you'll understand how two, sides can write two very different histories of the same period. Right? So this is just the context that, okay, Delhi goes through this just 20 years earlier, and then you have the first Delhi Darbar, which is called the Imperial. Was that Queen Victoria wanted to be declared empress. And that is actually a power struggle that's happening between her, sort of daughter-in-laws. And long story, I can read about it later. But basically, the gist is that she wants to be declared empress. So now the viceroy then, who comes into office, is Lord Lytton, and he is the Governor General of India, the Viceroy of India in 1876. Now, Queen Victoria has already written to the British government, Disraeli, saying she wants to be declared emperor. Now, Lytton comes to the conclusion that if we have to bring out another proclamation, let's have a grand celebratory event. Let's have a visual announcement, right? And he thinks that we should have a celebration that lasts sort of 2 weeks. And let's understand that all of these darbars are actually the first examples of the aestheticization of imperial politics. They're the first time that you are, building an imperial image, like the British Raj is building that imperial image of themselves ruling India, right? So the first couple of considerations is, okay, let's have it in the Red Fort, because you have the previous emperors having all of their, their bars, their celebratory events, their feasts in the Red Fort. But then they realized that they want to make it on a scale much larger than that. So what they do is they take acres of land on the outskirts of Delhi, which now you all know as Coronation Park. So that is where the main proclamation takes place. And around it, what they do is they allocate land, and that's where Durbar camps and tents are erected. And the Durbar, the Imperial Assemblage is supposed to be for 2 weeks. So now what's important to have in this Imperial Assemblage other than the proclamation? So you know that Queen Victoria is not coming to India to attend this coronation. So Lord Lytton, he kind of comes to the conclusion that the main ceremony is going to be him reading out the proclamation that announces Queen Victoria as Kaisar-e-Hind. Now, along with that, they need to find other ways in which they make sure that they hold power in India and that everyone is under the British crown. And how to bring the masses together? The best way to do that is get the dependence and the loyalty of all the Maharajas of the princely states. That becomes the most important. So then the idea of the Imperial Assemblage is gathering all the rulers of the princely states and having them come attend the Imperial Assemblage. And that sends the message that, okay, if all these Raja Maharajas are coming to pay their loyalty and their obeisance to the Queen, which means obviously that now you have Queen Victoria as the ruler of entirety of India, right? So along with the main proclamation ceremony, you have the investiture ceremony, which kind of, there is already an order existing which is called the Order of the Star of India, which was brought in 1859, right, or 1858, right after India comes under the crown. That is a hierarchical order where they bring in all the rulers of the princely states. They think during the Durbar, let's introduce a new order. And they introduce the order of the Eminent Order of Indian Empire. And that is another way in which they bring in all of these rulers and give them medals and ranks according to the hierarchy. So you're already subconsciously creating this sort of system where all your Raja Maharajas are coming under the umbrella of the crown but are given ranks. And these ranks are dependent on the loyalty that they show to the British crown, right? So the most important state becomes Hyderabad, then becomes Mysore, Baroda, and then you have so on and so forth. So the imperial assemblage is also the first time the gun salutes happen. So you have 21 gun salutes, which is introduced for the most important and the most powerful princely states. Then you have 19. So Mysore, Hyderabad and Baroda get 21 gun salutes, then 19, then 11, so on and so forth. And the viceroy gets 31 gun salutes during the imperial assemblage, and for the queen you have 101 gun salutes. So, this is a photograph of a panorama taken by a very famous American photographer called John Edward Sache. Sache is working in India since 1864. So he attends the Imperial Assemblage in 1877 and he takes a panorama where you can see the dais. This is the main dais where the proclamation takes place, and an amphitheater is constructed in a horseshoe shape around the dais for the Rajas of the princely states and high-ranking British dignitaries to sit. So this is a photograph, a close-up of what the dais looks like, and it was designed by Rudyard Kipling, the father of Rudyard Kipling. Yes. So now, next day you have, these photographs coming in the newspapers, and an artist called Val Prinsep comments that this looks pretty much like a circus tent, which it sort of does. And you'll see how this design of the main dais changes with every darbar. And as the darbars go by, you'll see more and more of Indo-Sasanic architecture, like the Mughal style of architecture coming in. Here you have a very interesting photograph, and this photograph, you see the scene coming up quite a lot in other paintings, in other photographs, which shows spectators pretty far away. So during the darbar, there was no provision for the average Indian to come and see what the darbar looked like. So there was a mound that was constructed miles away from the amphitheater and the dais, where people could just gather to see. But when you're miles away from something, you barely can hear anything, or you can't even see anything. So the way in which people in India and abroad get to know about the darbar is through photographs. It's through photographs, it's through postcards, which is why this whole section is made up of photographs. Also to bring in that point that the dissemination of information then is happening through these photographs. People not just in India but outside are coming to know what the British Empire is doing in India, what the British Empire looks like, what the Imperial Assemblage looks like through these photographs and postcards. Tents erected far, far away. Each of the Rajas of the princely states were given land to sort of with their own camps from the called the Kashmir camp made for the Maharaja of Kashmir. You'll see similar camps by sort of photographs in relations of the Begums attend the darbars. This is an interesting photograph. It's actually dated 1862 and it's from an album called The Peoples of India. It is a very famous photograph because the album gets reproduced several times, but it's a rare image of the Begum because the Begum is without her parda. And you see the succeeding generations of Begum come to the next two darbars as well, but they are completely in parda and they are veiled. And a part of the amphitheater that I was talking about is reserved for women in parda to come attend. And obviously these are women of princely states. Now we move to so you have Queen Victoria passing away and Edward VII succeeding the throne in 1902. So the same sort of philosophy has to apply where he has another coronation in India where he's declared the Emperor of India. And this time the Viceroy of India is Lord Curzon. So by then Lord Lytton has sort of gone off and Lord Curzon is now the Viceroy of India. So the context has changed a little in terms of the fact that now you have all of the princely states that were earlier diverse princely states under the British Crown, by now they've all become this homogeneous body of people. You have the Privy Council, they're all working under the British Crown. So they've become a homogeneous body by now. And also there is slowly nationalism, tendencies of nationalism on the rise. So it's important that this Darbar again consolidates that image of the British Empire and image of the Raj and the power that it holds in India, right? So Curzon here comes up with the idea that this time this Darbar has to be grander than the last. And here he comes up with the notion that here we should be showing the oriental splendor of India. So if you're creating an image, you have to see what India looks like in all its glory, with all its, like traditions, cultures, etc. So this is a Darbar where you see the stark contrast between India under its native rulers and India under the British administration. And that's the kind of imagery that is focused on here. If you see the state entry that happens, in 1877 also there is a state entry where, like Lord Lytton comes in an elephant. So the state entry here starts at the Delhi railway station and ends at the Viceroy's camp. And in the first elephant you have Lord and Lady Curzon, the second elephant you have the Duke and Duchess of Connaught, and from the third elephant onwards, it's Maharajas of the princely states, starting with the Nizam of Hyderabad, then Mysore, then Baroda. So you still continue that hierarchy and that system that was put in place. But the imagery is much grander and the scale is much grander. And you see, he brings in the notions of looking at notions of modernity here, where he thinks it's important, and he introduces for the first time the arts exhibition. So this Darbar, you see for the first time you have an arts exhibition that Curzon plans, where he plans to show all of the craftsmanship and the artistry that happens in India to the entire world. So he's deciding that those people who will come to Delhi for the first time to attend the Darbar will also see the arts from different parts of India. And this is also a time where, exhibitions are happening all around the world. So you have the World Expo happening, you have international exhibitions. So it's also a time where he's thinking that, okay, these are concepts in modernity, these are things that he would bring and introduce during this Darbar. Now, a lot of artists and photographers come to attend this Darbar, right? And they take images and they paint images. One of the very famous artists that attended this Darbar is actually an Australian-born British artist called Mortimer Menpes. And Menpes comes and he makes sketches of the procession, he makes sketches of the elephants, the flag bearers, all of that sort. So you see an oil painting of Menpes here. And what he does is, by then technology allows him to change these sketches to illustrations and add them to a book. And that's what he does. He makes these sketches and his daughter Dorothy writes the text. And the text is actually his experience of the Darbar. So he's talking about how much he is in awe of the Darbar. And then he, publishes this book Darbar in 1903. Now, this book becomes incredibly famous back at home in Britain as well. And one of the people who reads the book is a clockmaker called William Britton. Now, William Britton had his own company of military miniature figures. And I don't know if you all knew, last year we had another exhibition called March to Freedom, where we put up these military miniatures mimicking the entire procession of the Darbar of 1903. So this time what we thought is we would bring out the miniatures that describe a bazaar scene outside the Darbar camps. So Menpes here is not just making sketches of what is inside the Darbars, but he's also making sketches of what daily life looks like outside the camps. And this is what then William Britton comes up with, and these are the military miniatures that you see. So a lot of people are coming to Delhi for the first time. Tour guides are made. One of them, which you'll see in the vitrine outside, it's Fanshaw's book called Delhi Past and Present, and it's one of the most famous guides of Delhi. So this time also Curzon is also encouraging people to come see parts of Delhi, which is why places like the Jama Masjid, the Red Fort become important. Curzon here also then takes the decision of revamping the Divaniyam, and he adds, and he makes it twice its size by adding temporary structures, and then he hosts the state ball and the state dinner in the Divaniyam. So these are also ways in which you are taking, like important sites of previous empires and then using it and appropriating it again for this, right? 1911. If I can just wait. First, this is the first time the monarch himself is coming to attend the Darbar in person. Second, by now nationalism is quite on the rise. You already now are having protests and things like that. The Indian National Congress is working. So it's now far more important than ever to have the Darbar to consolidate the power of the British rule, to maintain that image of the British Empire. And it's even more important to make sure more and more people are included in the Darbar. And that's exactly what happens. Here, George V comes up with the idea that this Darbar would be a Darbar for the people. So unlike the previous two Darbars, where there was no consideration given to, average Indian spectators, this Darbar makes sure that more and more people can come and attend it. So if you see, this is panorama by a famous commercial studio called Vernon and Co. You see the amphitheater, there are two amphitheaters. And then there are spaces that are spent for the spectators, for the troops. And obviously that brings in the idea of more and more people coming to attend this Darbar. If you see the main dais, we'll look at a closer picture later. The main dais looks vastly different from what it did from 1877. And remember, I was talking about the tomb of Nizamuddin. If you look at the tomb and you look at the main dais now, you'll understand what I was talking about in terms of the appropriation of architectural styles in the Darbar. So this Darbar is very consciously bringing in Mughal traditions, Mughal architecture, and seamlessly adding it to a part of the Darbar, right? So while those still had a sense of British coronation with, having your investiture ceremonies, the proclamation ceremonies, this Darbar is consciously thinking of more ways and adding Mughal traditions to it. So like I said, last two times you had the state entry with elephants and all your, viceroys on the elephants along with the rajas of the princely states. Now, elephants were always attributed to royalty in India. So your average Indian was very used to seeing their Raja Maharajas on elephants. Now King George V took the decision that he's not going to ride an elephant at all. He's used to horses and he's going to ride a horse into Delhi. So now for his state entry, he rides the horse. And if you see, there's a photograph in one of the albums where he's entering Delhi on a horse. Now what happens with all the people that have gathered on the streets of Delhi to see him on different buildings as vantage points, sort of miss him, because all of them are very used to seeing their rajas on elephants. So they don't understand that there's the king, especially a king who's coming from Britain, has already come in and gone. So to rectify this mistake, the next day, both the king and the queen come in all dressed in their imperial robes to the Red Fort. And they have a garden party on 13th December where they come out on one of the jharokas of the Red Fort to give the Jharoka Darshan. So Jharoka Darshan traditionally is very associated to all your Mughal emperors. And it's your Mughal emperors that would come out into the Jharokas and then wave at their people. So here again, you're consciously bringing in an age-old tradition of your predecessors, and then you are, appropriating it to become the natural successors. So around 1 million people came to see the new king and queen in their imperial robes at the Jharoka Darshan. Right, we move on. This is a very interesting painting. It's made by an artist called M.V. Dhurandhar. He's a Bombay school artist. and he's a very famous modern artist, as famous as Raja Ravi Verma. And he makes a scene of the Durbar where you have Queen Mary giving an audience to the ladies of the princely states. Now he adds both the queen and the king into this image. What technically such a thing would not have happened, because the ladies of the ruling states would not have come in front of the prince without the parda. So you know that the scene is entirely imaginary, but it is also a scene that marks his loyalty and respect to the British crown, because he's adding the king and queen together as the symbol of power. And you see other ladies of the ruling states probably, like arti and breaking coconuts and things like that. And he won his 5th gold medal for this painting. And he exhibited this painting in 1912 at the industrial exhibition in Gwalior. So you know that these are commercial artists who are coming, attending the Durbar, making paintings, knowing that these are images that would be widely circulated and would get them not just accolades but money. This is another map which shows you the plans of the Durbar camps for the king and the queen and the viceroy's camp. Here you have some images of the Darbars of 1911. You have a set of postcards, and this set is included to just give you the idea that tens and millions of postcards were made during the Darbars, all related to the Darbars. And this was disseminated not just globally. Whoever attended the Darbar could write postcards, and a whole post office was erected along with a railway station. And I'll show you what stamps and everything looked like for both the Darbars. So just bringing in the idea that how many of these postcards and photographs were taken and then disseminated globally. Here, this is the closer image of what the dais looks like, and here is what I was talking about with, other built monuments of Delhi. You can see the architectural similarities. Again, photographs of different camps. You have the Patiala camp, the Jind camp, then the generic camps for subordinate groups. You have 2 canvases of the king and the queen, the royal couple. It's made by an artist called H. Banerjee and signed 1911. We do not know who H. Banerjee is. And most likely, if you look at the portraits closely, they do, tell that it's made from photographs. Right? The likeness is such that you understand that it's made from a still photograph. So it's just interesting to see how many amateur artists, how many unknown artists were they. Such a life-size painting is not possible unless you know that you're going to sell it later on, or it's going somewhere to be put in some place. Right? Now, the 2 vitrines that you all can look at later. This vitrine has the original invitations to the Darbar of 1911, as well as the admittance tickets and the medals. Remember, I was telling you the order of the Eminent Order of India that came out in 1877. So that had 3 ranks: Knights Grand Commander, Knights Commander, and Companion. So this pretty little medal that you're seeing is actually the medal that was given to the companion of the order. The other medals are all Darbar medals that were minted specially for the Darbar. So you had gold medals which were given to, again, the most powerful princely rulers, and you have silver medals that were given to all attendees. Now you see, each of these, you have one with the face of Edward VII, you have one with the bust of George and Mary, but if you see the obverse of each of these medals, you'll have Persian lettering. And that kind of gives you the idea that whether these medals, not just made for the British Raj, would contain the same inscriptions and writings of your previous empires. And you have the same concept as coins. Like when dynasties change and when new emperors come in, you still have the same coinage being used through. You continue with that. So it's the same sort of idea. The same postage stamps that I was talking about as a whole postal office that was made. So just examples of these postage stamps. These belong to 1903 and these belong to 1911.
Where is that postal office?
No, so this was
So
this was a post office that was entirely temporary, erected inside the camp. So they no longer exist, even the railway station. So this was just to, to understand how large the scale was. That whole post office was built with a whole postal system put in place. The same with a railway station built and a railway system put in place, right? Okay, let's first do the print. Now this print is interesting, how you have other prints and photographs and postcards all depicting different scenes of the darbars. This one does not depict a particular scene, but rather is a group photo sort of arrangement. It's basically you have the king and the queen, and then you have all rajas of the princely states behind them. So how we click our class photographs, right? So it's also understanding how art and prints were used in terms of symbolism, where you are basically seeing the power of the British Raj in India through one single sort of artwork. And it kind of brings that, symbol out in the open. Okay, there is one more vitrine that we should touch upon before we end with the last bit of the experiment. Now, if you see these small diaries, these are actually directories which were given to every attendee of the Darbar, right? And these directories, the first couple of pages is a schedule of the 2 weeks. So you have things like church service, dinner, fireworks, then your state ball and your main ceremony. Then you have a couple of pages on the Darbar itself, talk about the importance of the Darbar and why you're having the Darbar. And then the next couple of pages is like a planner like this. So you have hockey tournaments, polo tournaments. So in your 2 weeks, you're completely stretched with every day being a different thing. So this particular diary belongs to a Knights Grand Commander. And he's written handwritten notes that says opening of the arts exhibition, morning dress, viceroy's dinner, ball dress. So it comes to show how meticulously thought out each of these darbars were. That for every day you was doing something different, and there was a code of conduct and dress code for each of these events. So you can look at this vitrine, and then the last test. And so these two chairs are chairs actually that were handcrafted for the Darbar of 1911. You have Delhi and 1911 engraved along with GRI, which is the imperial cipher for George V. Now, each of these chairs were made for, let's say, high-ranking British dignitaries or rulers of the princely states. And how they were customized is through the royal coat of arms. Now, each of these chairs had the coat of arms of the invitee it was meant for. So this coat of arms belongs to someone called Colville, who is a Scottish clan. And we think that the clan had members who worked very closely with the British royal family, which is why they got chairs customized for them. Now, once these people could, use these chairs at the darbars, the interesting bit was they could take it home as a souvenir. So basically, after sitting on it, you can, take it, and once the darbar is over, you can take it home. So similar chairs exist in with the royal families of Jaipur and Udaipur, and these two, because they belong to the Colville family, they were in London once upon a time. Now, this big cloth that you see, which is a velvet cloth, and it's embroidered with Zardozi embroidery. Now, we were all wondering as to what this cloth is, and finally, Rana came up with the notion that this cloth is actually a Kwan posh. It's a big tray cover. So when you give obeisance like Nazrana, you have these huge trays where you have all of the things. This is basically to cover that kind of large tray. And what's interesting is you would have made in Surat embroidered on the cloth itself. And this is one of those examples where artists have actually been able to take credit and give themselves that identification that it's made in a particular part of the country. Right? Okay.
The material is velvet?
Velvet and then Zardozi embroidery. So with the main ceremony of the 1911 Darbar, George V comes up and makes a special announcement which is kept completely secret till the day of the Darbar. And he comes up and he announces the shifting of the capital from Calcutta to Delhi. So this happens on the day of the main ceremony of the Darbar. And ultimately you are shifting the whole of the British administration from Calcutta to a new capital in Delhi. And the very next day the foundation stone is laid down in Raisana Hill, and a new Delhi is supposed to be built. Right? Why does the capital shift to Delhi? Okay.
1911
Culture was
because that is the center of
Yes. So back to what our points was, like first it being the center of the subcontinent. So obviously if you are now ruling the entire subcontinent, it's easier for administration to be at the heart of the subcontinent. Second, yes, the imperial past. Now third, also during this time, it's close to after the partition of Bengal. The partition of Bengal takes place in 1905, and you still have violence and everything happening in Bengal. So it's uncomfortable for the British to continue remaining and ruling out of Bengal. So what they do is, George, along with the announcement of the shifting of capital, he announces the unification of Delhi, unification of Bengal. So then Bengal is supposed to come back together again, and by then, like they leave the people of Bengal to fend for themselves, get out and say, okay, we're now going to start, ruling out of Delhi. Now the exhibition ends with the map, which you see, which is right opposite the working table that we have. It's a very large map, and it's one of the earliest layouts of what New Delhi or Imperial Delhi is supposed to look like. And it's put together by Lutyens and Baker, who are conceptualizing, and they are the architects of Delhi. And it's given to someone called Albert Edward Greason, who is a horticulturalist, who is supposed to be landscaping Delhi. So that's where the map comes from. So that's where we end the exhibition. Right, any questions? One posh, it's basically a tray cover. So when you have, like nazranas given to your kings and queens, and you have those huge trays, can I be crass and say you've seen Jodha Akbar and you see the huge trays that are given, right? And then that whole thing is covered with a tray cover. This is basically that tray cover.
Madam, we see the robes which king and queen have worn when they came for coronation.
Yeah.
We read in literature that they were made in India by the Indian art.
Yes.
Was it true or
Yes. So see, so these robes are not just, so basically, especially for George V and Queen Mary, they didn't want to bring their crowns and robes to India. So a new crown was sort of put together and made for the Durbar of 1911 along with the same imperial robes. So the robes are the same as they were in the coronation that took place in Britain, but here they were specially made for India. The same case that takes place for the Durbar ball, where Mary wears the peacock dress. So the entire peacock dress is actually sewn in and embroidered by artisans in India, but it's designed by a Paris atelier, and they take the credit of the peacock dress, which is now in Kedleston.
So we can say that in fact Indian culture was also being taken in their dress because peacock.
Yes, of course. So you see, like every aspect of the Durbar does talk about certain ways in which Indian culture was appropriated for the British. It's important for the British to come and show that, like they are also taking in our culture, so that people here accept them as their, new rulers. But then here, a lot of even in the arts exhibition that takes place in 1903, you have so many artisans from all around the subcontinent coming for the exhibition, right? But they do not get the credit as such. Their names are only, put in lists and then published in a book. But other than that, you barely, understand that these are such artists. Whereas other British artists, other, European and American artists who came to the Durbar, you have their paintings and things like that have now become super famous.
Was exaggeration of events was done through images as well?
Of course. So you have three ways. You have a whole press camp that's put in. So you have press reporters who are writing for newspapers, and the biggest way in which you see the information about the Darbars going out is through postcards, through photographs, through newspapers. And obviously here everything boils down to image building, which means you're trying to create an image for the Raj, right? So that happens through taking of photographs. Later you learn as to how, a photograph is a reciprocal object. So even if your intention is something else when you're taking the photograph also reveals other things, right? So your micro intentions being leaking through, that comes second or third year. Yeah. If there are no other questions, you all can actually go around. Thank you so much. You all can go around looking at this exhibition. If you all have any questions, Himantika, Ganga and I are here to answer them. So you all can come look for us.
And there are activity sheets at the reception area for you guys to engage.
Yes.
And there's an iPad which has the newspaper clippings of the 1911 Durbar, so you can please have a look at that as well. That iPad is right next to the map. That is the
भाई अपने को भी ले लो रुक जाओ
And like the plan was
You can also move here or just like sit downstairs so all of you
बैठ जाओ